This is being recorded now. It's on. I haven't forgotten. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Mark, over to you once I'm getting people in as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. To the latest, just very quickly to talk about where we are with our various unofficial committees. We have our GDPR unofficial committee going full steam. I'm getting feedback from the Colombia point of contact that there is significant interest being shown in that. We are also offering to be the focal points on our sustainability drive and also our diversity drive. So if those of you who want to have the contact information of the relevant individuals within the Columbia group who are working on sustainability, working on diversity, you may already be in a much more advanced position than us, in which case share it, then please reach out to Kuba and we'll provide the point of contact for that. Equally, again, I would call out on particularly the larger members, if you have particular policy drives that you believe would benefit other members of the association or initiatives, then please throw your hat into the ring and let us all benefit. I'm happy to carry on doing so as Columbia, but there are others of you, not just the big members, but also the small members that may have really interesting initiatives that we should be sharing and can valuably share without prejudicing any competitive advantage. Things like sustainability, diversity, GDPR for the benefit of all of us and our clients, our colleagues and our crew. So that's good. Where are we on the vaccine issue? Well, you've seen the press is very interested with InterManager taking the position it did. We are pushing separately for television coverage and also coverage in the UK national press and other national presses because as has been seen and talked about, I think, in the Singapore Maritime Week, maritime world is a very small little world. Very few people outside of the maritime world know anything about it, or dare I say, care anything about it. So we've got to get into the national presses. Papers like the Financial Times, BBC, etc. We have to get on those platforms to air this. There is, I think, the need within InterManager. We've said now that we're going to, as well as supporting the other organisations, but also go it alone more as well. There is a need to do something, and Kuba and I have discussed what that looks like. Some of the companies, some of the members here have already done something, therefore, including Colombia, I hasten to add, therefore we need to share what we've done and see whether it's relevant for the wider membership. But we also, I think, need to get a working group together, another unofficial working group, to drive this forward and show that we are walking the walk as well as talking the talk. Norman Schmiedel, who is senior director within our organization, was responsible for potentially securing vaccine supply for Colombia. I'll put him forward as the point of contact on this. Please nominate, some of you come forward via Cuba and get Norman's details if you don't already know them, and then let's have a really tight, dynamic working group to shake the cages. We all have to rattle and shake whatever cages we possibly can to bring this into the public domain and the public appreciation. I don't frankly care whether InterManager gets the brownie points for successfully doing this, or whether it's ITF or whether it's ICS. What I care about is to ensure that our crew members get vaccines. So whatever we can do to assist that by rattling as many cages as we can in as loud a manner as we can, together with working with other organizations, but also individually, then we should do that. And as I said, this is not about being the knight in shining armor to achieve the unachievable. It's just doing something as best we're able in the capacity that we're able to. Last point, General principles, the code of conduct. Again, Kuba and I have been talking about this quite a lot over the last 2 weeks. We have approached a company in Greece called Alpha Marine. Some of you will know who they are. We'll also get them to become associate members of this association. I don't believe they are already, Kuba. Alpha Marine are very close to all maritime sectors. In fact, they did a very similar exercise for Intercargo. When Intercargo put together its code of practice and principles and bylaws, they are going to, and they've been mandated to put together the starting draft for which we can then discuss and take forward. The problem with drafting anything by committee is that we'll all be old people by the time we get anywhere, and chances are we won't get anywhere because we'll all have various ideas. So I think Alpha Marine are very skilled in this. They will put together a first draft of the general principles. It will be very gentle at the beginning. There will be an enforcement aspect to it, and it will have a vision going forward where these general principles have various gradings, gold, bronze, silver, gold, KPIs, etc. But that's a long way down the line, and of course none of that will happen without all of our say-so. But there is the ambition to go down there if we decide. But Alpha Marine have been tasked with this to produce the initial draft, and will hopefully come back to it as quickly as possible. And then my final point is just to welcome Steve Cotton, General Secretary of ITF. We're very honoured to have Steve join us. It's part of our guest element to these meetings, which I think is a really interesting aspect of them. We all learn from them. It's also an opportunity to build a relationship where I think personally, coming from a legal background as a lawyer, also in my company, the ITF is all too often seen as, if I say the enemy, in inverted commas, I'm being too strong, but seen as perhaps unnecessarily as an adversary, where it's not at all. And what hopefully we will get from this is a better understanding of what the ITF does, and hopefully explore opportunities with which we can work with the ITF together in a proactive manner on specific issues and policies. One of them being, of course, the vaccine question, which I do think would be very interesting to join or link arms with the ITF and move that forward. So that's all from me. Thanks very much, Kuba.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you. You're giving me 2 extra minutes, but I promise to move to Steve very shortly because we otherwise will be wasting his time. But using my slot, members' issues since last meeting, we have concluded first snapshot of the on-signer testing positive. And because that's only the very first point, I don't have statistical graph or anything, but I can report to you that we did have some companies which did not notice any increase. However, majority of you were reporting between 14 to 20% of on-signers testing positive. We don't know whether it is growth or not. The gut feeling is then it is increase, but we will do another snapshot in May, and then we will compare. So we will see what's happening. Number of COVID cases on board, all of you basically reported then it is in a region of 0.004%. So really, really very, very small percentage of people being sick on board. And if there are any sick cases on board, majority of you were telling us that it is because some of the shore people coming on board are completely ignoring COVID requirements, and they have to be put right by the crew members and so on and so forth. The final thing I want to talk about is engineering issues, which I have managed to send today. Thank you very much for the members to actually asking us to do anything like that. One of our members, one member was very concerned what they have been seeing on board of the ships and wanted to see other members, what they believe is happening. And I did manage to collect everything. It was very good response from the members. Thank you, all of you, for coming back to me. And by now you should have received the graph which shows lubrication being the biggest issue. And now I'm also taking opportunity talking to the associate members. If there is something you can help us with, then here we go. You know what is waking us in the middle of the night when it comes to engineering issues. And finally, new members. Last week, we did manage to get 2 new applications, which they have been duly approved. It is Pitu Samundra from Indonesia and Polaris from Poland. Welcome those members. And as you can see, we gain now 15 minutes. Steve, that's especially for you. You are 15 minutes earlier. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for listening to our issues. As you can see, the 60-minute meetings have been now going for 2 months. Quite popular among our members. I would, for the sake of good order, remind everybody that we are recording it, so you can use it to share with your co-workers, with your colleagues. And Steve, over to you.
Can I just, before Steve kicks off, can I remind everybody, and I'm sure it's not, but I'm reminding myself as much as anybody that Steve, the purpose of Steve is to talk about ITF and how we build relationships. I think in any relationship, there are times when either side makes mistakes and either side fails the other. And what I've assured Steve and so has Kuba is that we will, as we always are, be very respectful to our visitors and really focus on the future and the positives rather than perhaps question the past, where we, as I said, we all made mistakes in relationships. So I just remind us all of that.
Okay, so first, Mark and Kuba, thanks very much for the opportunity. I would say don't hold back, because the reality is so unfamiliar to, I think, most people online, and probably the ITF's persona isn't always the same as my persona. So kind of the conversation is, what are we trying to do? And, you know, many of the people on this call I've probably known for nearly 30 years, which is a bit scary. So as the General Secretary, I don't want to date you, Dirk. So as the General Secretary of the ITF, just a little bit about what is the ITF. Our numbers, or the numbers of workers that our affiliates represent, is in the region. If we were at 20 million, we're now down to 18.8 million because of the COVID impact in civil aviation and all the other spaces. We are a global trade union federation, which means whichever union joins us is an autonomous democratic union in its own right. So our job is to create solidarity, provide expertise, lead in the international arena. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID response, and I do want to pick up, and I know that one of my team members was very well briefed by your team, so I do want to clear up the enough is enough strategy, and I do want to talk about why things happen, because I think it's kind of critical. And Mark, at the beginning, you touched on it in some of the senses, but so ITF inspectors are made up of, I think we're nearly 150 around the world, and some of them, your members, deal with them directly, and others of your members will deal with our national affiliates directly. But what became very clear to me, and you know, I used to be what we describe as the maritime coordinator, which is responsible for the 4 maritime sections: seafarers, dockers, inland waterway, and fisheries. In 2014, I became the General Secretary, and I kind of left you alone, and I kind of miss that, and I miss you in the sense that something quite unique and special about maritime, and maritime has shown itself to be resilient in the face of COVID. But we are the hidden industry, and again, Mark, you said it about the media, so I'll talk about the strategy. But what became very clear, I think, we represent under our membership something like 950,000 seafarers through over 200 maritime unions. But when this started, we recognised that the situation wasn't one of a traditional industrial one. It was a humanitarian global challenge. So the reaction from us was we had to kind of leave our old protocols at the door and work out how do we collaborate with the players that we had long-standing relationships. So for us, that's the ICS, because we're their partner in the International Labour Organization, although if you read today's press release, that doesn't read too well. And we're also our partners in IMEC, in the Joint Negotiating Group, which has built the International Bargaining Forum. But worse or different to that, and I think this is something I'll come into as we go through this presentation, the world is changing. So the role of the United Nations agencies have been reaffirmed by the crisis, and certainly our ability to access the United Nations Secretary General was also part of this conversation. But perhaps what we recognised, and we're doing bits of work with some of these, what we would call lead firms, but some of the most progressive multinational companies. So, for example, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Carrefour, their response to due diligence in their global supply chains has changed quite dramatically, and their ability to recognise the risk to their reputation has been something that we've been working with them. Like, for example, we have a pilot in Europe on trucking that's carrying Unilever goods, and rather than whistleblow when we find, again, with the greatest respect to everybody, illegal workers in Europe not respecting in trucking companies not respecting European legislation, instead of blowing it at Unilever, we work with them to find resolution and solutions. And I think that's where we've gone in this whole process. So I think, again, and this is kind of, I'm always surprised at how many industry players there are in maritime. In the ITF, there's us and the Chinese. On the union side, there isn't too many non-ITF affiliates. So when it comes to coalescing with all the industry agencies, it's quite a challenge. And I've run into Cuba quite a few times, and we literally don't seem too far apart on most of our pragmatic approaches to things. But we use the ITF's union in the Philippines, AMASUP. Very many of you are familiar with them. We put more money into testing, so we help them get their PCR kit, and we help them because it was very competitive in the Philippines at the beginning. And we were gravely worried that seafarers would be super spreaders. So we had a conversation with ICS and IMEC, our partners, about what do we do with this? And we came up with the recognising, and, you know, I'm very familiar with the Philippines and the outlying regions, how difficult it is to get a Filipino to understand what isolation really is. And there was a whole education and responsibility there to say, when it says a stay-at-home notice, it means stay at home, don't speak to anybody. So we came up with the formula about how to build a testing regime, and we used the AMASUP technicians from the lab to visit the hotel. We locked them in the hotel room in the nicest possible way, and we tried to provide video and TV and all those issues. And that's been done with IMEC. We then had the Singaporeans, and I think, and again, I'm open for conversation about this because it also comes to the end and I'm very worried about time. The Singaporeans, we believe, are part of the answer, although I know they're very frustrating with some of the rules and the constant changing of the timelines. But because we have an office in Singapore, because we did our Congress there, our two unions are, I mean, Singapore is a special, unique place. We know that through our unions and the NTUC, which is the National Trade Union Centre, we could get some traction about a methodology for crew change. And as part of that conversation, first it was PCR. Now it's looking to creating a hub in Singapore for vaccination. And we're driving this as a partner. And we're also in a conversation, and I'll come to that in a moment, in the World Economic Forum, who have their annual general meeting in August and want to show the world that Singapore's open for business. Star Fund, I think we put some money in, IMEC put some money in, and we had a meeting earlier this week where we went through what comes next. We don't think a two-shot vaccination is a solution for a seafarer outside of their home country. We're acutely aware of the risk and the challenge for the Philippines. We thought India was under some level of control, but clearly not. But I'll talk a little bit more what we're doing with the ICS about Johnson & Johnson in a moment. Part of the Neptune Declaration, so we're part of the Global Maritime Forum and all of the players there. It's kind of us have been reporting back, us and ITF and ICS, on the day-to-day reality, which I think our reality is the same as nearly all of your members, dealing with constant changing rules, reassuring seafarers. The pilot in Singapore is also, and we've met 2 or 3 different, is kind of recognizing that we will need some form of seafarer's passport, whatever that electronic QR code that's untamperable, and frankly it has to be interconnectable. So we're talking to 2 different providers, and in the Manila pilot we have at the moment, we have a QR code that cannot be tampered with and doesn't breach any data rules. So Amazon have to be verified. They search it, one unique code proves that seafarers had a PCR test, and we hope in time vaccinations. We've worked literally with all the airlines because we've been dealing with the airlines about loss of jobs and issues. We've been working very closely with the Qataris. We started a bad relationship with them about their airline at one stage. We now have a very good relationship, and they're ready to set a hub up in Doha. They've opened a seafarers lounge. And again, we're looking for places that could roll out the process. Just looking how I can speed this up for you, Mark. We're the counterpart of ICS at the IMO, and we've been party to all of those protocols, and they're working on a new protocol now for vaccination. I'm about to take a seat on the UN Global Compact for the global labour movement, and we've been working with them as consumers to bring to Unilever, Danone, Pepsi Cola the fact that shipping is an amazing industry, but it's absolutely dependent on global South labour, international civil aviation, and nobody realises when they shut the borders and make all these rules that it basically cuts the oxygen out of us. That's us collectively. So for us, it's always been about treating seafarers as key personnel, making rules that governments actually enforce. Been very disappointing at many different levels how governments aren't effective, we'll just put it that way. On the vaccination, so where are we right now? So I think Cuba's in the conversation, but at the moment it's us and ICS working behind IMO to get IMO to go to COVAX, to get COVAX to give us a dispensation to go and cut a deal, frankly. And we have used even a British lord to try and access Johnson & Johnson. And at the moment, to me, it's all bubbling around. I am in a conversation with Maersk about another vaccine that's not approved yet. I could do a bit on human rights due diligence. Tomorrow, there's going to be a human rights due diligence UN directive, which may have some impact on you with these multinationals, but it's embargoed at the moment, I'm telling you, out of friendship. And we expect that multinationals will come back down the supply chain and say, are your seafarers being treated and respecting all their human rights? Because we toned down at certain stages. Enough is enough, and I know that's a tentative issue for you folks. I have to say, everything we did about enough is enough was in consultation with the ICS and IMEC. And I was dealing some stages with ship owners going crazy about their charterers, and it was all meant to be to explain the risk for the world's economy and or its response to COVID, that if you don't respect the seafarers, and I meant the seafarers and the ship owners and all of us, then don't be surprised if they take action into their own hands because they are frustrated. And if we get time in the questions, I'd love to ask you, do you see the impact of jobs? Because that's what I'm getting anecdotally. It's more difficult to get seafarers to join the ships, and particularly as the COVID is getting worse and worse in India and the Philippines. I'm supposed to cover the future. Climate change, we're trying to educate our leaders that climate change is an issue for the shipping industry. It's something we've finally got moving. And there's a conversation about whether we sign up for the ICS recommendation about a super fund to build brand new infrastructure, or whether we add it to COP. But for us, I think it's also all going to be about what does a job of a seafarer look like? What is the engine room going to look like? And I'm assuming there's going to be questions then about what does the composition of a crew look like? So those are things that we should be having conversations with you about. How we do that, under what umbrella, I'm completely open. But for me, we would be naive to imagine that the engine room isn't going to become more and more of a political issue for our industry as we go forward. I think areas of cooperation, and I think perhaps some of this stuff we've touched on, due diligence to me was, when I used to run around Cyprus trying to get everyone to sign agreements, the fact that we would be lobbying for due diligence for lead firms was unimaginable, and how that would become an impact on shipping. So to explain to union bosses who see collective bargaining and membership as their daily job, that the fact is the outside influences of the world are coming to shipping. Even trying to explain in the middle of this crisis, the Ever Given situation, again, probably one of your members, probably a company that we've got a good relationship, definitely a ship with a good agreement, definitely a good crew, to try and explain why there's a Taiwanese company, a Japanese company, a Cypriot ship manager, and a Hong Kong office and an Indian crew was kind of crazy. And I think we have to come out of this as an industry where we say, look, we do have good standards. There are good players, and whether it's the unions, we can fight over things that we always fight over, wages and stuff like that. But it doesn't change the point that our industry is under more scrutiny now. And I think a collaboration of partners is probably more important. And for me, COVID on a personal levels, we work with people, and unions are all about people, and shipping is all about the seafarers and hopefully better quality ships. The ITF still does a lot of really good humanitarian things. We don't always talk about it for fear of creating crisis. We have been counselling, Mark, one of the sessions you and I were on, you talked about well-being. Our crew, our claims handlers have turned into more like counsellors, and they're not trained to be counsellors, if I'm perfectly honest, than actually claims handlers, because the reality is seafarers going, can I get off in this country? My ship owner won't let me do this. My ship owner won't let me do that. And we had to protect their integrity and work with all the people we have partnerships with, which frankly is most of the people on this call. So the ITF as an adversary, I kind of feel like we've changed a lot in that 30 years. I don't know that some of our leaders of our unions, and I could probably pick my president, who's the boss of the Australian Dockers Union, he's not changed very much at all, right? His audience is still very much the same. But the reality is, as I've gone well over time, sorry, is that we're at a crossroads in time for the industry about what do we want the future to look like? What do you want the future seafarer to be? For me, always been a professional, always been brave, always been historically well respected, but their respect has gone down. And we did ask difficult questions given the last 14 months. If the world's seafarers were American or British, would they be having the problems we'd had in getting medical health and treatment and getting on board off ships and be allowed to move around? So we've done a great job working collaboration. I think ICS, ITF, IBEC. Happy to work closer with you in whatever space you feel we can develop each other. I do think we're at crossroads about how that collaboration looks, and you have to bear with us because some of these things are really scary. The industry changing for some of my union leaders is a difficult space for them to understand why is climate change an issue for Conrad Oka? And I say, well, you've got a cadet school, you've got training, all of these things will impact in you some way. What's the alternate fuel? And where does Philippines fit? You may have, I don't know, the solutions about, I think COVID will be with us for some time. We anticipate that all of the steps that we need to put in place to protect seafarers, but also to protect the industry, reputation, cross-border movement, need to be built on transparency and honesty. So I hope I've represented the ITF pretty honestly, and I'm really happy to have any question. I mean, sometimes I get confused what the difference is between ITF and Steve Cotton, and we're a democratic organisation. I happen to have the privilege of leading it, but it certainly isn't a top-down organisation. There's a very democratic combination underneath that can do and say as they please. But we do think working together is very much. And last thing, Mark, sorry. I've been dealing with civil aviation as well through this crisis. We're quite unique, and it's quite special that seafarers, and maybe because there's so many seafarers throughout the senior management of the shipping companies, ship managers, when we decide we want to work together, we really work together, and it's much more difficult in civil aviation. Thank you. Happy to take any questions. Any questions?
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting. And if I could lead the charge on questions, I've got something that I think it is important. I think, with the greatest of respect, ITF has not actually done enough, and I don't mean that as a criticism of what you've done, but you've not done enough to take the lead in some of these exchanges and interfaces with governments. You talked about this yourself. You represent people. People have votes. People have other people's sympathies, and therefore you are far more effective, far more listened to, far more relevant than NGOs or business organizations such as ICS, such as IMEC, such as, dare I say, InterManager. I say dare I say it because InterManager also represents people. I think we probably represent more crew than even you do. So our people DNAs are linked. But what I would like to see ITF doing more is taking the fore, because as a union, you are much closer to the sun than all of these other organizations put together. You're much closer to the power. There's always been that governmental versus union, and not always, versus doesn't always mean it in a negative way, but you are a thorn in the side, and sometimes a constructive thorn in the side, and a listened to thorn in the side of governments all around the world. And I think rather than working with ICS to go to the IMO, who goes to the WHO, who goes to this, and only to be told that, oh, this is also political, we can't move until the governments tell us, you're firing your shot. It's a broken arrow, and you have you are a much more effective governmental cage rattler, which I talked about before, than any of these other organizations, in fact, than any of those organizations put together. So I would like to see the ITF, joining up with these others, but actually leading the charge and having the exchanges with the governments and rattling the cages, because you represent votes. Simple as that. And votes is power. And I talked about in the last Singapore Maritime Forum about the problem with our industries. We have no PR. We have the ICS, we have BIMCO, we have Intercargo, we have Intertanker, we have InterManager, but none of them come together to actually go out to the public, to my kids, to people walking down the high street, and tell them what the industry is about and the issues about the industry, and what the people involved have to put up. That's ITF's. No one is better capable of doing that. You have the funds, you have the ability, you have the advisors to do that. Perhaps do it in conjunction with us, but let's get the message out there and educate the people, so we don't need an Ever Given to actually cause my kids around the table to say, oh, why is that important then? Why is it 90% of goods are taken by sea? Where are the questions that came up about the maritime industry because a vessel blocked the Suez Canal was the best PR for us, but we should be doing more. And the BIMCO type video that we all loved, we all loved it within the maritime cluster, and we all patted each other on the back and said, didn't BIMCO do a great job? But how many people outside the maritime cluster actually got to see that video? Because it was internally focused. It was, aren't we as BIMCO doing a great job? Didn't we produce a great video? It has to go out. And that's what I would say, raise your sights and actually be the leaders, not just the agitators within the industry and the followers on, because that's what you are. You're a people. You represent the people, and then we will build up so much better the relationships that we talked about wanting to, and work together on proactive and have a much better understanding of each other. So that would be my request.
don't think that's a question, Mark. I welcome that view. I think, and I will say to you and everyone online that sometimes how to achieve. So the government stuff has been a lot of private meetings and conversations with different governments about where we can go with the vaccines, and I think we all know you can't really publicise that. I did say, and we did the intergovernment meeting, I think it was July, hosted by the UK government, and we spoke very strongly, but it was to transport ministers of, and they all signed up for it. They all signed up for the statements about, and of course, I think some of your points shared from our side about frustration, because, you know, everybody says 90% of the world's trade, and we say, well, but we've got a crisis about PPE, and we have people in cities dying from PPE in buses because they had no protection equipment, and then foodstuffs, and the only thing that was moving in lockdown is the supply chain and supermarket and warehouses, which we represent as well. I have been disappointed, and I've been involved in a lot of these personally, government's inability to communicate from the health department to the transport department. And quite clearly, the politics of each of these governments has been driven, and Singapore is a prime example, by the medical teams that lead and advise the senior government. In the Philippines, we did 3 meetings with ministers and senators to try to explain for themselves about the importance of Filipino seafarers to the economy, to the world industry, and we did it in conjunction with IMO, ILO, and still today we're having every 2 weeks a meeting with all of these players in a virtual room somewhere. The next meeting is 4:30 today, where we list all of the bilateral meetings that everyone's been doing. So I think I want to reassure you, Mark, we have been doing that, but that question about what does the coalition of the willing look like for shipping? How do we build it better? And I'm quite happy to put the ITF up the front. I've been the one making a lot of noise all through Christmas and about charterers and how they've transferred the responsibility to ship owners, which directly has a problem for seafarers. It's like, and you know, oil majors that should know better. And we've named a few.
But why doesn't Steve? Why don't my kids know Steve Cotton from Good Morning Britain? Why aren't you sitting on the couch saying, "Oi"? You know, that's what unions do, isn't it? Unions are a pain in the backside, and maybe you know, your focus. Maybe you need to be more of a pain in the backside outward from the industry players than focusing inwards, because it's all about prioritization. And you know, we are looking after our seafarers as a collective. We are looking after our seafarers. We are ensuring that they're getting the best pays, the best rights, etc., etc. Now perhaps it's time for ITF to look outward and be a pain in the arse, and you know, because maybe there is a place on that couch for you to say, do people realize? And we're only talking 1.7 million. So global Britain, go and make a bold statement and give 1.7 of your 260 million stock to seafarers and set up hubs. And wouldn't that be a fantastic step? But it takes a Steve Cotton, not a Mark O'Neill or a Kuba or anybody else. It takes a Steve Cotton to do that. Just my thoughts.
Okay, so I'm going to sign you up at the end of this and work out how we actually do it, because the reality is I'm up for that. The bottom line is, when we started this, the world didn't really pay any attention to shipping at all. And all the stuff we've done behind the scenes, I have given so many interviews. And on this one, it's a little bit delicate because it's not the ship owner's fault that there's COVID. And most of the journalists want me to say that, because they don't really want me to say, governments, why don't you recognise these brave people that go to sea every day that make sure you can have cornflakes? So we've tried all that. Now there's a load of kind of, say, partly educated journalists, because we only kind of give the ITF version, but we haven't been funny about ship owners. And I did say, and this was the bit that I know that enough is enough was a question, and I did speak to. We drafted the letter for the big 4 container companies to write to the Secretary General of the UN. And I said, how do you feel about us making stoppage? It didn't really go anywhere because They then had a meeting with the Secretary General of the UN, and I was his Vice Secretary that I'm underneath. I didn't realise that the Secretary General of the UN can make three statements on seafarers, and it doesn't make the blind bit of difference. So there is some, for us in the bureaucracy of it, is amazing we got that far. What's the most frustrating is we can't deliver it, and it would look like to me we could be back 14 months ago again with what's happening in India. And so yesterday we said to the Singaporeans, if we convince the Indians to do what we did in the Philippines with a proper lock-in model, and now they're panicking because the virus there is such a mutation, which is apparently 50% quicker to transfer or 50% more impactful. So I said, look, this time we now have been through 14 months. If you're prepared to lift the 14-day, what do we need to put in India about isolation? If it's 3 weeks, then tell us it's 3 weeks. And we'll go back and have a conversation with the Unilevers about how much more it's going to cost them to move stuff so they can pay for that extra 7 days or whatever it is. So I think if it takes us to be louder, but I would like to agree what the model of the industry is, because in the end, the enough is enough is I had ship managers going crazy telling me no one respects us. Some of them will be your members. What are you going to do, Steve? And I said, well, we'll strategize about saying the seafarers have had enough. I lost some agreements to the ITF because of that. I had to make personal telephone calls to a number of big ship owners. I said, no, look, this was a strategy that we agreed. Now, InterManager wasn't in that strategy, and maybe that's also partly a mistake. But it was to create leverage and to build pressure. If the world thinks all their ships are going to stop, then you'd think then that the governments would go, well, that's not going to work for us because foodstuff's reality. So I'm taking it all on board, Mark, and I'm happy to invest in what do we do next, because I think that's the big question. I don't think these challenges leave us, after our hour. But I'm happy to ask any other questions. And if there's someone there that wants to ask me directly about something they don't like, I'm also quite open about that. I never have been anything other than open about what the ITF does. And we make mistakes too. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Cuba, this is Rajesh here. Can I jump in, because we have got 15 minutes left?
Go for it.
Yeah,
I think I wanted to say, if you've got a question, please raise your electronic hand so I can actually direct the traffic. Rajesh, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I think Mark very certainly put it out. Although he did mention not to go much in the past, but I can't help myself to the future lies in the reflection of the past. So I will still come to that aspect. He made use of the word enemy. You have, whether the perception remains as an enemy is fine, but you have a bigger challenge when you have an irresponsible enemy. Because even when you're dealing with the enemy, there are rules of engagement. So I know the ITF have understood the enough is enough was, and just for Steve's benefit, just a very simple and honest feedback. The one who wrote that article or the ITF publication had absolutely no inclination of what happens on the ground. It was nothing but copy paste from the MLC code. At the time when it came out, it had a picture of a aircraft taking off. Seafarers have the right to repatriation, but nobody realized how many planes were taking off. So how could you throw that out to that? Anyway, that's the past. I think from where we sit, and in particular where we sit here at Campbell Shipping, I know it's a difficult time. Key worker status. We should have thought about seafarers as a key worker status, not when the COVID struck, but much before that. We always knew 90% of the trade go through the ships for many years now, for decades. But we never pushed the key worker status. But I don't think so it's going anywhere. I think you need to be more vocal, as Mark mentioned. What we need is, in one simple sentence, we need your ITF inspectors worldwide to have some sort of practicality in dealing with individual cases, things that come knocking on your door. There are real challenges on the ground. And I think some of the people are getting carried away by the position they hold or the ITF designation that they hold. It gets to them uh, personally. They have to be, mindful of all the challenges that we hold. So all we ask is a patient listening to the challenges on the ground, and that we are working through. It hurts a ship manager and a ship owner who's trying to do the things properly. You can't put everybody in the same bucket. So we just want some time till we have the vaccination sorted out, till we have the airline capacity coming back, all the restrictions that are just coming up every day. We see why Singapore this, Gibraltar this, New Zealand this, Canada this. Everything's coming out, popping up every day. That's the first fear that I have. In every morning you wake up, you see another roadblock, on what we are trying to do. So that's in a nutshell. We need a little bit of a patient hearing from ITF, and you need to educate your ITF inspectors deep to the bottom of the chain as to what is happening around.
Okay. So, well, you may be surprised to hear there is a training and education program for the ITF inspectors, both on what's in the collective agreements and what is the Maritime Labour Convention, and they've got the ability, and they go through the ILO school in Turin to be able to do an ILO maritime labour inspection process. If I was perfectly honest, at the beginning of the Maritime Labour Convention, we trained a lot of the port state controls to do the human element. And I think probably the frustration you feel and the frustration that your crewing teams feel when they try to move stuff around and one flight gets cancelled, another flight gets cancelled, our folks suffer the same challenges when they're dealing with a crew. So I would say, ITF inspectors is a global community, and there's a varying level of competency and cultural difference within some of our processes. Most of the folks that know us know a way to get to London if it's getting a little bit too heated on the ground, and there's history through your HR departments and ITF directly when things get a little bit heated. We had to help a number of companies manage their immigration through our local unions, make sure they could get their seafarers off the ships safely, securely, and to the airport when there's a hope that there would be a hope above all hope that you could make a connection with a flight. I think the bit that is like I can't concede is there are some ship owners and ship managers that do tell lies to ITF inspectors and do tell lies to seafarers. And we had Panamanian register, like not our favourite register at any level, panicking to us because they said, what do we do? Because we called flag state meetings, we did all sorts of things. Flag state meetings, can you imagine? The ITF picked the biggest FOCs and asked them what are they going to do. Translated, Mark, and this goes to the point you make, those flag states don't have any authority in the United Nations system. The subcontracted Liberian authority, Panama is the most genuine one in the group, if in the nicest possible way. And we were talking offline with all of those players how to deal with the problem. And then at the same time, Australia and China decide to have a trade war, which, like, frankly, Mark, we have written to the Chinese government and we have written to the Australian government, and probably my letters ended up in the wastebasket because the bottom line was the situation is quite messy. So I think it's Rajesh, is it? So Rajesh, I think there is an inconsistent flow. I can reassure you, if you need to talk to anyone in London, please feel free to talk to John Canayas. He heads up the team. He's a very pragmatic Filipino who's known through all of your departments. We have, it's the strangest thing, we are an organisation with our own dynamics. The people that sign agreements have a problem with the people that enforce them. So the ITF inspectors say, this is what it means. This is how it should be. Look at what that paragraph says. And we say, yeah, okay, but don't let that seafarer get off in that country. There isn't a plane. There isn't a connection. We need to give them a dispensation to get from that port to the next port, and whatever they call it, the alternative route dispensation. I think we can do better in this space. And, you know, there is a conversation, and we did it in Cyprus. Can you remember when we brought the ITF inspectors to Cyprus? We did it so long ago. Well, if we can remember when Klaus died, because Klaus agreed to sign the agreement with us and then died the next day. So that wasn't great. God love him. Klaus Oldendorfer is biggest ITF hater I ever met. We convinced him to sign up. We brought the inspectors to a venue near you to have the social interaction, to build a relationship, because ultimately they're human beings doing their job. You know, can I say this? And we're being recorded. As long as you use it with caution. Sometimes seafarers don't tell us the full story either. And our position is evaluate, check it. If it's one of the companies where we have a long history, we go straight to the head of the team and go, we've got this issue and we need to find a solution. COVID's made that even more difficult, because I can only imagine how tough it is for the crewing departments, who I think have personal relationships with the seafarers that you employ, and are dealing with their families as well about when they're going to come home. So I think there's a very acute moment about tension and stress. And we should look at that as part of our bigger picture, because we've seen communicating to wives is something that's very critical. And we're encouraging our maritime unions to do events with the wives to make sure they're reassured. So just on the point, ITF inspectors, they're amazing people. They're very difficult to lead, I'll tell you that. But they try to do the best they can. And if you have heated moments, please feel free to get in touch with London, and we will try to unpick thorny problems and treat everybody with the respect I think they deserve.
And Steve, if I may actually support you on this one, you've got me as well. You've got the secretary of InterManager. We've got a really good relationship with ITF. Sometimes very heated discussions I would have with Dave, but we always come to solution. You know, we understand each other's position, and that's good. So if you are frustrated with anything, drop me a line, and I will know where to go. Either, you know, whatever names I would use, and I wouldn't say that we didn't manage. So by all means, we've got last 3 minutes, I would say, and I know that AJ has put the hand up. AJ, please go ahead. You are muted, AJ, at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Kuba. Thanks, Mark. My straight question is to Steve. Very straightforward question, and I have discussed with Kuba also before. Is there any plan by IMO with the help of ITF to have some leniency against, as was declared last year, in delayed crew change, for the extension of contract, 7 months up to 9 months, 9 months up to 12 months, because currently it is creating really again a panic situation because of delayed crew change. The panic crew change is not leading to the quality crew change, and we are really facing a huge problem. So my question to Steve is about that. Any plan on that? Thanks.
Okay, well, I heard anecdotally today that the Director General in India may close the ability to move Indian seafarers out while the situation calms down. So I think this is one where we can say in public, let's tell Cuba what the problem is, define the company, let's name the ships, and let's us prepare for the problem rather than deal with the consequences of the problem. Because the reality is we've got a very strong enforcement from port state control over the implementation of the ILO. There was a force majeure argument in March 2020 that you couldn't do crew change. And we accepted that. We were party to that. We didn't say it, Mark, but we were party to it. Then as things opened up, and I think, again, we saw the 400 go down to what we think is approximately 200,000 over contract. But now with what's happening, and I'm very worried that the Philippines will go the same way as India, that we're going to have to kind of solve the problem in advance and have the conversations with the company, but with the IMO, with the ILO. And I'll go to this meeting at 4:30, 5:30 today and say, I've spoken to the industry. How can we prepare ourselves? Because what was very clear a year ago was we're quite fragmented, like we're resilient and we make the world move, but we're a bit fragmented. And the flag states literally looked at me as if I had two heads. And I said, yeah, but it's your responsibility. They're your ships. Like, I'm not going to argue about FOC. Like, what are we going to do? And they couldn't do anything. So in the end, it's been us with those bodies, Mark. And I think it's clear to me we're going to have a serious problem with India, and we're going to have to fight to access vaccinations for seafarers. And, you know, Abdul Ghani is the boss of the ratings union, has already offered to pay for them, bless him. So I think our solution on that stuff must be include Cuba in the conversations about hubs. Let's break through that. But while we're working our way out, and we don't think, like, our target for Singapore would be to have secured the one-shot vaccine, to have a dispensation from the Singapore government, even if they haven't registered it, because we've got strong protocols. We probably need a conversation with you about the indemnification of you as the employer with the seafarer for the shot, because, like, there's a lot of politics around this. How do we make sure a Filipino can pass through Singapore on the way to join the vessel, gets his one-shot jab, gets a quantifiable, untamperable proof that they've had the vaccination, and join one of your ships? We're choosing Singapore. We've got 6 other countries: North America, Holland, UK. I put Panama on because I think we need something in the region, but Panama's a disaster when it comes to vaccination program. And I'll be careful what I say, but you can't be certain that if we send vaccines there, we need to be certain they're going to go to seafarers and not disappear, to use an East End vernacular, off the back of a lorry. So we need to make sure whatever we come up has got due diligence protection. So AJ, happy to deal with the detail and recognise that certainly for Indians, we're going to have a serious challenge coming right up. And Cuba, happy to open and have the conversation. Dare we even meet in public next week in London if you're still there, you know, and have a conversation about how to deal with it. Because what I did say, and I will know we have to finish, I perceive, and taking on board what Mark said, the ITF from the old ITF, where we were always looking for a fight about everything, now it's all about solutions. And the conversation about a solution has to have an industry take up, has to be our collective solution. Yep. And I'm ready to put the ITF into that space. I always have, I think, but I'm ready to do that in the most public and ferocious way you want. But I think it's an opportunity to reevaluate how we have our relationships. Thank you for the opportunity.
Steve, thank you very much. I'm very conscious about the time. So, guys, thank you. Mark, your last word, and then we finish off. Mark, over to you. You are muted, Mark.
Thank you very much to Steve for coming along. I'm sure all of us will agree that you're an incredibly likable and genuine individual. In fact, probably the most likable and genuine union person I've ever met in my life. So that's fantastic. And you know, you're more than welcome to join us anytime. I found it incredibly interesting. And let's fight for the solution on the vaccines. I think this would be a great start to you know, perhaps a more constructive and understanding relationship, really joining forces and fighting for this vaccine. I think it'd be brilliant. Thank you all. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks everyone. Guys. Thanks for the opportunity. And follow me up direct if you want to follow up anything, Cuba, however you want to do it. We'll take follow-up questions directly as you want. No problem. And thank you.
Lovely guys. Guillotine is coming down.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Doug.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.